Trump attempted to justify his use of federal agents, which only increased and escalated tensions and violence in Portland during his interview with Jonathan Swan. Let's take a look.
These are Homeland Security people. They're securing a courthouse.
They're Border Patrol.
They're Homeland Security.
Elite units.
Border. Hopefully they have ICE in there. Hopefully they have ICE. Now, do you know why they're unmarked? Because
why?
These terrorists, these Antifa people, these people that are anarchists and agitators, when they see the name on a uniform of a person, a policeman, a law enforcement person, they find out where that person lives. And then they go and they scare the hell out of the person's family. Why should you have identification? My name is Bill Smith, and here's where I live, and I'm a member of.
The really serious concern is
no,
the reports. Not about that. The serious concern is the reports of people being rounded up and not being told why they're being detained. That's what's being investigated by Mr. President. The inspectors generals. The inspectors generals.
You know why they're being detained? Well, yeah.
There's an investigation. Do you support that investigation?
Well, I haven't seen the result yet.
But do you support the initiative of it?
No, I think that actually, I think Antifa should be investigated, not the law enforcement.
We had Asher Caulfield, who helps produce this show, do some fact checking and look into specific instances of Antifa causing problems during these protests, and she failed to find anything of substance. And I'll give you that evidence in just a minute. But I do want to talk about this notion that federal agents were a positive presence during these protests, because that is not the case. They only escalated violence. And we have proof of that because beginning last week, federal agents started leaving Portland and allowing protesters to practice their constitutionally protected right to assemble and to free speech, okay? So NBC News recently reported that tensions have largely calmed since last week's announcement that federal agents would take a step back from policing the Mark O. Hatfield federal courthouse, a deal the Oregon officials hoped would ease friction between law enforcement officers and protesters who vowed to continue demonstrating until the agents left. By Friday night of last week, by the way, the fence separating protesters from Homeland Security officers was decorated with balloons and upside down flags sewn together with BLM painted across. At one point during that night, a small firework was shot over the fence. As it fizzled out, protesters pleaded with each other to remain calm and peaceful. Later, a few small fires were occasionally started outside the courthouse, with at least one put out by another protester or other protesters. So I give you that because the protesters overwhelmingly do not want to, divert the message to nonsense. They want to focus on what's important here, and that is that we need a change in how policing is done in this country. It's not just about raising awareness about the disproportionate number of Black and brown people who get murdered by cops in this country. It's about legitimately finding solutions and changing the system. By the way, prior to the agents' arrival, protesters focused on police brutality, systemic racism, and the Black Lives Matter movement, but tensions flared after federal officers showed up at the urging of President Donald Trump to dominate ongoing unrest. So Trump specifically escalated violence in Portland. There's no question about it. The evidence bears that out. But what the evidence does not bear out is that Antifa has become any type of problem during these demonstrations. I'll get to that in just a minute, but Aida, I wanted you to jump in.
Well, what I also thought was interesting is how much we focused on whatever it is that the protesters were doing and not on how it was handled according to the law of the United States of America. So you had officers that took the law into their hands. They were not reading people Miranda rights. They were kidnapping people, putting them in vans, driving them off. And I don't understand why the rest of the country is not more alarmed about that, because depending on the administration deciding what they think a civil unrest is and addressing it in that manner, who's to determine how, if some, and let me be ridiculous here, some Girl Scout troops start, protesting, or the University of Michigan fans. I guarantee you that when one of those protests happens in those colleges and predominantly white students go out, set cars on fires, and have these types of outburst because their team lost. If you deploy these officers into that setting and they start arresting white sons and daughters of lawyers and doctors, that the outcome would be very, very different. And so while we're sitting here talking about what the protesters were doing and where they were not doing, we should be talking about how they did not deal with that legally and it was not handled according to the rules and the laws of this country. And that's what we should be alarmed because they keep pushing the line further and further.
Ida, you make such a great point. In fact, in that exchange, Jonathan Swan brought up an investigation into the Department of Homeland Security. So let me give you details about that. So the House Intelligence Committee is concerned about some of the surveillance that took place by federal agents during these protests. And so there were two specific journalists, we covered this story in great detail, who were being surveilled by the Department of Homeland Security. And as a result of that, the acting undersecretary for DHS's intelligence office, Brian Murphy, has been reassigned. So he was essentially fired from that position, but that's not good enough. Luckily, there is a House committee investigating this further, and that does violate our rights. I mean, journalists have a right to be there. They have a right to report on that story, and to know that they were being surveilled that way is disgusting, but it goes beyond the journalists. The fact that protesters, as you mentioned, were being snatched up and thrown into unmarked cars, not knowing who had basically done that, who had detained them, is a huge problem. And it is a violation of people's rights. And so with that said, let me also just mention or remind everyone of the evidence that I promised regarding Antifa. So the Associated Press actually looked into this to see if Antifa had a significant presence during these protests and if they were causing any type of problem. The Associated Press found in an analysis of more than 200 arrests, even those accused of breaking the law during the liberal city's nightly rallies don't neatly fit into Trump's depiction of protesters as anarchists and agitators. The AP found that 95% of those arrested by police and federal agents were local. The vast majority have no criminal record in Oregon. Many appear to be college students. Their average age was 28, court records show. They're mostly charged with misdemeanors, like failing to comply with a lawful order, while some face felonies like arson and assault on an officer. Most people have been released and some have been arrested more than once for similar offenses. But in none of these cases did the Associated Press find individuals associated with Antifa. So to refer to Antifa as terrorists, individuals who should be investigated rather than doing a full investigation of authorities who have violated Americans' constitutional rights is just outright disgusting, authoritarian, and exactly what you can expect from someone like Donald Trump.
They always go for the journalists first, right? That's part of if you think about what happened in Russia, you think about, they always attack the journalists first. But everyone who is fighting for the equality of people and justice are considered radical. I mean, the rap that they've tried to put on Antifa, Black Lives Matter. And when I say Black Lives Matter, I'm talking about the ideology, not the organization, which are two different things. Because people say, well, Black Lives Matter got $3 million. Black Lives Matter is a belief. It is a collective belief amongst people who have humanity that Black people's lives matter just as much as everybody else's. So, they keep hijacking these movements and giving them these names. They want to make Antifa this terroristic organization. But why aren't we talking about all these other organizations like that? They are the ones that are a threat to our Constitution and to the citizens of this country.
Well, Ida, when it comes to those people, I mean, there's very fine people on that side, right? I mean, Trump has said it himself. But before we run out of time, let's go to one more clip from this exchange.
Why do you think black men are 2.5 times more likely to be killed by police than white men?
That I don't know, but I don't like it.
But you must have thought about it.
I don't know why, but I don't like it. I do know this.
Does it speak to something
police
systemic?
Have killed many white people also.
But proportionally, what does it speak to?
It speaks to something, if that's the number, you're telling me a number. Okay, if that's the number, it speaks to something that to me is unacceptable.
And what do you do about it then?
Well, I think we've already done a lot of things.
But you haven't, it still exists.
Let me just tell you.
No, I understand your achievements. I know what you're gonna say. I'm not suggesting you haven't done a lot economically.
I've done a thing called criminal justice
I get it.
reform.
I'm just saying what changes.
President Obama couldn't get
He's not my friend. I'm asking about that statistic.
He tried, but he couldn't get it done.
Trump loves to cite his so-called work on criminal justice reform. But as we've shared with you guys previously, he actually behind the scenes regrets focusing on criminal justice reform at all. In fact, he had told some of his staff that he shouldn't have listened to the advice by Jared Kushner. I'll get to that in just a second. But the more important issue here is what was mentioned by Jonathan Swan. Black Americans account for less than 13% of the US population, but are killed by police at more than twice the rate of white Americans. And Trump doesn't care about criminal justice reform. According to Axios, he never really wanted criminal justice reform. And that's according to people who have discussed the subject with him privately. He's told them he only supported it because Kushner asked him to. Trump now says privately it was misguided to pursue this policy, undercutting his instincts, and that he probably won't win any more African American support because of it. It always goes back to him, Aida. It always goes back to him.
Yeah, we all know how Donald Trump feels about anybody who has any form of melanin in their skin. And the fact that he is disputing the numbers. And then when he says, oh, if that's what you say the numbers are, then that's indicative that your president, the president of the free world, is not even, he doesn't even know the numbers. He didn't know the numbers of the people who died. He doesn't know the statistics of the black people getting killed by the police. What does he know? What does he know? Nothing. That 6,000 imaginary people showed up at his rally in Tulsa? That's what he knows? Come on, son, get him out.
Yep. Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.